Dun, dun, dun. Now I am live. There we go. Anyways, I hope we are live. Oh my god, I got myself on the. Let's get me off that. Okay. Okay, so today, thank you for joining us today. Today is it is 4:15 at on October 20th, 2025, and we are going to be talking about Palestine. We're going to be talking about the No Kings protest. We've got a couple of clips to watch and go through, and then we're going to talk about how America is spiraling deeper into fascism, and take it from someone who has lived in an authoritarian regime, not in Canada, obviously, in Pakistan. By the way, that authoritarian regime, puppets of America, installed by America. I know, fantastic, isn't it? Anyways, let's go ahead and watch the first clip and go from there. How about that?
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Nermeen Sheikh with Amy Goodman in Santa Fe.
This is Democracy Now!, that's right, and we're going to end right now. Even as President Trump has cracked down on dissent and sent troops into multiple cities, organizers of Saturday's No Kings protests expect millions to join at least 2,500 rallies across all 50 states and several U.S. territories. It could certainly go throughout the world. Turnout expected to surpass the 5 million protesters who turned out for No King's Day events in June. For more, we're joined by two guests.
Sigcho Lopez is older person of the city's 25th ward. It includes immigrant neighborhoods such as Pilsen, where federal agents have conducted violent raids and arrests. And in Washington, D.C., Leah Greenberg is co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible, the grassroots movement which part of the No Kings Coalition, helping to organize Saturday's protests. Welcome back to both of you. Leah, if we could begin with you, just talk about the scale of the protests across the country and what you're expecting.
Well, we're expecting about 2,600 protests all across the country in every state and about 18 other countries as well. And we're expecting millions and millions of people to show up, and we are expecting to have a joyful and defiant day that stands as a rebuke to this administration's corruption, its authoritarianism, and its attacks on our neighbors and our rights.
You know, Leah, I was on the plane to Albuquerque, and as people were getting off, they were telling me about the mass protests planned for Albuquerque. They expect somewhat 100,000 people coming in from small towns and cities after having their protests in their towns. There's going to be one here in Santa Fe as well. Apparently, the Trump administration, President Trump himself and those in the White House are deeply concerned about this, and that you have these threats comparing people here to Hamas sympathizers and Antifa, and we've heard what Pam Bondi said, how she's going to deal with Antifa. What is your response?
Our response is that we are engaging in the most American activity in the world, which is coming together in peaceful protest of our government. This is a classic exercise of our First Amendment rights, and it is a classic exercise of the authoritarian playbook to try to create fear, to try to threaten, to try to make people back off preemptively. And we're not going to do that. We won't be bowed, or we won't be cowed. We won't stop. We will continue to exercise our rights peacefully and joyfully and all over the country, because the backlash to Donald Trump is everywhere.
So I'd like to bring in Byron Sigcho Lopez. If you could talk about what you're expecting to happen in Chicago. But first, I'd like to turn to a clip. This is Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who made similar unfounded claims on Fox News about the No Kings protests.
What I've been urging is follow the money, cut off the money. And you look at this No Kings rally, and there's considerable evidence that George Soros and his network is behind funding these rallies, which may well be riots all across the country. And Soros is writing the check. And so I've introduced legislation called the Stop Funders Act that would add rioting to the list of predicate offenses for RICO.
And now let's go to Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking on Fox News.
I encourage you to watch. We call it the Hate America rally that will happen Saturday. Let's see who shows up for that. I bet you see pro-Hamas supporters. I bet you see.
When he says pro-Hamas supporters, he means pro-Palestinians. But they just like to conflate everything with Hamas, just like they like to conflate everything to do with Israel with Jewish people, which exasperates the issue that is anti-Semitism. But these people don't care. These guys are idiots. Anyways.
Antifa types. I bet you see the Marxist in full display.
So, Byron Siccho Lopez, if you could respond to these comments.
Well, it's, anything that comes from the Republican Party is nothing but a distraction. They should be focused on the Epstein files. But one of the things I tell you here in Chicago, what we see is working people coming together. We have never seen this level of unity in our city as we see the shameful, disgusting attack on our city, or constitutional rights being violated on a regular basis, the defiance of federal judges' rulings, and intimidation of judges. So we will not be intimidated. We are not going to be intimidated by no kings, no wannabe dictators. Our city has been victim of a atrocious attack. They're turning the military on working people. We saw how they're shooting at innocent people, then lying to the public. They murdered one of our neighbors. They're conducting a shameful raid. They have kids in C-blocks and parents that are naked in the middle of the street. So Chicago is not taking this. We've been organizing about knowing our rights, a massive campaign that was successful. Now we got to protect our rights. So the Republican Party is a party that is spilling propaganda. They're calling anybody who disagrees with them a terrorist. They want to crush dissent. That's what authoritarian regimes do. And here in Chicago, they're going to find a massive demonstration, more unity, working people fighting the billionaire agenda.
I mean, what's happening in Chicago, you have this judge's angry ruling yesterday saying that ICE is defying what she said as they attack protesters. You even have, Byron Siccho Lopez, this week, ICE arresting and detaining a police officer in the Chicago suburb of Hanover Park. So how are you organizing these protests tomorrow? And are you concerned about the violent approach that ICE is taking, that they'll attack the protests?
Well, certainly we have seen an unhinged, unaccountable military force. One judge already in Portland, Oregon, said it clearly, and we agree. They've been using the military as the personal militia of the wannabe dictator. They are using excessive force. Not only they arrested a police officer just 2 days ago, they went to another neighborhood after they attacked one of our neighborhoods on the neighborhoods on the southwest side, and they shot a woman that posed no threat to them. They also, just a few days ago, arrested 3 people, 2 of them U.S. citizens. One of them was a 15-year-old black youth that they disappeared for 5 hours. They are unhinged, and the best way that we can do to protect our communities is mobilizing our communities in every corner of the city, and certainly mobilizing on No King's Day to demonstrate the unity of working people. We will defeat the Trump administration. We will defeat Project 2025, and we're asking the judges to hold the line. We see a number of rulings.
I mean, look at this. When I'm watching this, it reminds me of the West Bank, of how Palestinians are treated by the IDF. It reminds me of the massacre that just happened just north, I believe, of Lahore in Pakistan, where pro-Palestinians were marching. And it looks like, we're going to cover it later, but almost 1,000 people were killed. Yet the government is trying to say it's only 5 people. And remember, these are allies of Trump. Crazy. Not so crazy, obviously. They're covering their faces. Why? Because they know that what they're doing is morally wrong. And yeah, I mean, there's just so much you can say before you realize, like, this is just absolutely crazy. I'm used to seeing this stuff happening across the world, and half the time America is behind that one as well, right? The riots in Pakistan that ended up in Imran Khan's arrest, who was the democratically elected leader in Pakistan. It was only a matter of time before this stuff becomes imported to America, but
we're winning in courts, but they're not respecting our Constitution. And in that sense, we need to protect it by mobilizing. There will be no fear, but the fear of what will happen to us if we don't mobilize. And this is the time that we want no wars in Latin America, no wars in the Middle East, and no wars at home. This is the time to stand up and hold the line. And Chicago is mobilizing and fighting back to an administration that is unhinged, attacking innocent civilians with the full weight of the government and the militia that is being deployed as a military weapon, a militia, personally a militia of the wannabe dictator, and also what we're not talking about, the intimidation of judges. Last week or a few weeks ago, they burned the house of one of the judges. We must hold the line and protect each other. Mobilization, organizing, and not giving them an inch in the courts, in the streets, in legislative bodies, wherever we need to fight, we're going to fight back.
And Leah Greenberg, I mean, as you mentioned, these are not just nationwide protests, they're actually also global. So if you could tell us what are the cities where you think the protests will be biggest, and then your guidance to protesters about how to keep safe this weekend as these protests go on.
Absolutely. Well, it's hard for me to say where I think it's going to be biggest. I think we are going to have enormous protests in many of the big cities across America. I also think that I can't emphasize enough how incredible we are seeing these smaller protests in places where there has never been a protest before. We are hearing about, dozens of protests across Montana and West Virginia and North Dakota. People are coming out in neighborhoods that maybe have never protested before because they are so activated. They might not have ever been political before, but they are activated by what is happening in this country right now, and they know they have to show up. And in terms of safety and security, we take this incredibly seriously. We've been working very closely with hosts across the country who are organizing these protests to make sure that everybody is trained in safety and de-escalation, has a safety plan, that there are marshals on hand when needed. And if folks are interested in security and safety training, then they can go to our website, nokings.org. We have safety protocols for folks to participate
Leah, we
in.
have to leave it there, but we will cover these protests, of course, bring it to folks on Monday. Leah Greenberg, co-executive director of Indivisible, part of Saturday's No Kings protests, and Byron Siccho Lopez, alderperson for Chicago's 25th Ward. That does it for the show. I'll be at the film about Democracy Now!
Subscribe to Democracy Now! They do great work. Now let's see, what do we want to watch next? Let's debunk Zohran Mamdani. Let me give a like. Go to Left Reckoning. Please give them not only a like, but a subscribe to their channel. Oh no.
There have been some really ridiculous and salacious allegations against Zohran that have been amplified by folks that, I was back and forth about whether or not to engage in the first place, right? Because you don't want to give more oxygen or attention to this kind of thing. But I figured as a public service announcement, I can sort of take us through this and we can kind of get our facts straight here. So I'm going to bring this up just really briefly, and don't bother any of these people. But this got seen by 1.4 million people, right? So you got to kind of respond to it. This person posted a photograph of Zohran. The caption says, "As mayor of New York City, I would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu," and then saying in September 2025 that Zohran, quote, says, "Arresting Netanyahu would make me a Trumpian fascist." Zohran never said that. It's kind of a bizarre lie, and this New York Times story that we're going to get into is kind of amazing because this actually one.
So, like David Griscom said, don't bother that guy. But Inhumans of Capitalism is a tanky organization or tanky account, and I don't understand what he's doing here, or what they are doing here. Why are you making up a fake arresting Netanyahu would make me a Trumpian fascist? Like, are you an op? Are you working for Cuomo, who is on Bibi Netanyahu's legal team pro bono? He's doing it for free. He's doing it for the vibes. He's on his legal team defending him at the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Like that's your alternative. So even if Zohran had said this, which is not true, he's still way better than Cuomo, not only for New York, but also on Palestine. So what are you trying to accomplish here? That's my other thing about the No Kings thing, right? I see all these. See, this is the problem. Liberals see tankies talking and assume it's leftists, when leftists are not tankies, right? Tankies are going, oh well, what are you doing? Like, what does the No Kings protest do? And I agree that the No King protests aren't protests; they're rallies, right? That's what they are. They are rallies. However, it's something. It's where leftists can go and start building, grassroots bridges and coalitions to fight against what you are seeing happening in America, which is slowly falling into authoritarianism. So when I see these tankies, and look, I'm not going after every single tanky out there. Like, obviously, they're not a monolith type thing. But when you're trying to tell me that going to a No Kings rally and voting for Zoran Mamdani is a waste of time, what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives? What are you doing other than sitting around and complaining on Twitter? What are you doing? Anyway, let's keep watching.
The main focuses of some recent reporting on Zoran is how people are frustrated that he will not back down off of this. What it seems to be the sourcing from this, and what people were trying to say, is that Zoran said to Mehdi Hassan that in arresting Benjamin Netanyahu, he was interested in following international law. Like, he wasn't just going to arrest political enemies of his. So he was doing something very smart there, was differentiating himself from somebody like Donald Trump, who is actively engaged in these kind of punishing of political opponents.
He's doing a vocabulary term that they teach you probably around third grade, which is known as contrast.
Ooh, well, this is going to be a big problem. Yeah,
that's crazy though, David, because I saw a reply today
Free Oakistan.
where somebody said like it would make him a Trumpian fascist. I had no idea what they were referring to. I had not seen that sort of fake quote. That's crazy that's traveling like that.
Yes. So and we're bringing that up to start because that's not the focus of today, just because it's going to be interesting as we go into this New York Times piece that everybody's been kind of quoting and questioning and wondering what's going on here. That, like, one of the big fixations of the piece is the fact that Zoran has not backed down off of this, and how the New York Times thinks it's a major problem. I'm not going to pick on anybody. I decided we won't pick on anybody here. But basically what has been getting shared has been excerpts from this piece here inside the improbable, audacious, and so far unstoppable rise of Zoran Mamdani. And in it, let me just make this... in it, there is this line, which you will find if you open up your Twitter account right now, being quote tweeted by many, many people asking themselves, wait, what does this mean? Right? The line says, Zoran supports Palestinian rights. He's not anti-Zionist. He's made concessions when it comes to policing, and he said he's open to compromise when it came to this proposed millionaire.
I'm sorry. I know we want to just watch the clip, but I do need to step in. Zoran Mamdani is absolutely anti-Zionist, because when people ask him, "Oh, do you believe Israel has a right to exist?" he very clearly says that he does not. Israel has a right to exist as a nation with equal rights for all. Zionism is a Jewish nation without equal rights for all, only for Jewish people. There are no equal rights for Palestinians under Zionism, because the very foundation of Zionism is taking land away from Palestinians. That is not equal rights. So he is very cleverly and very in a very smart way saying that no, Israel does not have a right to exist. So he is an anti-Zionist. It is very clear that he is an anti-Zionist.
Tax. Call it Mamdani 2.0. And let's start here, because this is kind of an amazing thing to see certain folks who are, media literate, understand things, taking a screenshot of this and be like, what does this mean? Well, this is a New York Times reporter categorizing their understanding of Zoran's politics. I think Joe Road on Twitter actually had a very good response. I just want to highlight here first. The New York Times is a self-described Zionist publication that manufactured consent for a genocide and called Zoran's primary win a, quote, spiritual Kristallnacht. Why any leftist would trust their characterization of Mamdani's as, quote, not anti-Zionist is baffling to me. And I think that is just like perfect in the first reaction. But what is being talked about here, and I'm going to do a public service for everybody. We will go through the piece, and I will actually show you what it is that he's talking about inside of this piece in a second. Do the work for folks who I guess have no interest in actually like reading any of these things or engaging with any of this stuff, just coming up with fabulous conspiracy theories and new stories to tell about one of the most exciting political campaigns and one of the strongest pro-Palestinian movements in American politics. But one of the things that is so incredible here is, as they noted there, is that this is a categorization by a New York Times reporter, not a quote, not a position, and we can investigate whether, something, but like if you're saying like, oh, it looks like Zoran's changed his position here, you should say, okay, well, where's the sourcing on this? Where is he saying it? What is he doing? Oh, this is just some guy's understanding of Zoran who's writing about it. What they are talking about is the position that Zoran Mamdani has held from the get-go, which is a brilliant position. Amanda, you can kind of help me weave through why it is so brilliant here. But the position is when he gets asked on the question of Israel, which every single Zionist in the country asks him time and time again, do you believe that Israel has the right to exist? Zoran Mamdani responds, and he says, Israel has a right to exist as a state with equal rights for all. Can you explain why that's a big problem?
Yeah, that's fundamentally, that's part of the myth of Israel for liberal Zionism, that such a thing is possible. It is not. You cannot, Israel is not set up to do that. They have no intention of doing that. And so basically, you can say like, I am supportive of this thing that they can never do. But fundamentally, the object of Zionism is to have a supremacist Jewish state in that region. We're seeing the foundations of that being built in front of us. That's what someone like Miriam Edelson wants. So that's a challenge but that's a challenge that Zionists can't openly say we don't care yet. Now, when Trump says one state or two state, that kind of worries me because
Okay, so he just said essentially what I said in a better way. He said it he's much better at speaking about this. But yeah, exactly. The way Zoran Mamdani says he believes Israel has a right to exist is a way. It's a very anti-Zionist way to frame it, right? But I'm not going to go into it. Let's keep watching. Sorry about this. I know I'm annoying.
The whole problem with the one-state solution, where Palestinians aren't given the franchise, and they couldn't because there's too many people there. They would outnumber Jews, which again Zionism can't permit. The problem with a one-state solution is that's not a democracy then, because again, you're not going to let those people vote. And then it's apartheid, which is what we know it is anyway. But this is why we're in this sort of fiction of legal limbo where Israel is our closest ally, but they can't define exactly where their borders are. Mm-hmm. And so that's why like that challenge is the perfect line, because it is fundamentally anti-Zionist, but in our media, the way it's talked about, they're not having that conversation of like where they're willing to say like, actually that's not a hurdle Israel's ever going to jump, so what do we do next?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. 100%. It puts them on the back foot. It's been a phenomenal answer all the time. Every time he gets asked it, because yeah, there is a charged media environment that has tried to push this. Now, all that being said though, Matt, like that's been the position of Zoran forever. Now, I don't know about you. I have a feeling I can guess. Would it be a problem for you if Zoran started taking a pro-Zionism position?
Yeah, it would. And also, just one note, we didn't mention this last week, but his statement on October 7th was basically copy-paste of his statement the year prior before he was a mayoral candidate. Which
it was a great statement as well.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
So that would be a big problem if Zoran is becoming an anti-Zionist. So here's what we're going to do here on Left Reckoning for our wonderful audience and all the folks tuning into this video. We're going to take a look at this article and see where this information and this big heel turn comes, because I'd be very upset if I found out that Zoran had kind of changed his mind on these kind of positions. Now, it's a long article. So let's say I'm just somebody who's learning about how to use the computer and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. What should I do? Maybe I'll do some keyword searching and see about relative areas. Oh, shit. That's kind of interesting, right, Matt? This note here, big pull quote. None of this works without him speaking up on Gaza. Talking about Zoran Mamdani, we have it, sorry, coming up right next.
Yeah, I mean,
Here we go. Here's the quote. Sorry, the pull quote pulled me out. None of this works without him speaking up on Gaza, in pull quotes, said Gaspard, the former Obama administration aide, who likened it to Barack Obama's opposition to the Iraq War. Gaspard has been a key figure connecting Mamdani with many of the city's power players in the months. For the average person on the ground, and this is important, okay, so maybe he is vacillating on this. Maybe what he's saying is like his timidness on Gaza is important. No, for the average person on the ground having conversations in their barbecues or on their stoops, there's a way that this issue of Gaza is a gateway to whether or not you can invite this political figure into your living room for a conversation about affordability or education or healthcare. Gaspard said, citing new polling that shows growing disapproval of Israel's actions among Democrats. Quote, you don't get to first base on the other things if you haven't come out against in the batter's box against Gaza. Okay, so the major quote here on Gaza that we're seeing in this piece is about how much it matters to the success of Zoran, right? Not really oh man, he's kind of betrayed his politics here, right, Matt?
Yeah, and even the sort of New York Times summary of this here cites this oh crap, where did I just lost it?
I can zoom in.
Oh yes, Mamdani's own allies. Okay, here we go. The issue which he's most steadfast on has been the central to his political identity support for Palestinian causes. In our interviews, Mamdani reaffirmed his commitment to one of his most controversial campaign promises, that he would order the police department to arrest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if we were to come to New York City. I mean, yeah, this line is, yeah, go ahead.
The first line, Mamdani has said he would be honoring the warrant issued by the International Criminal Court charging Netanyahu with crimes against humanity in Gaza. Well, this is interesting for a couple reasons. I just want to take a moment and kind of marinate on this for a second, Matt. This is interesting because, just a couple days ago, what did we learn from all the fucking leftists on Twitter about Mamdani and arresting Netanyahu? That he didn't want to do it, that he backed away from it, right? And here it is in this big New York Times piece that is also now telling us that he's turned his back on fighting for Palestinian rights and has become a Zionist, right? I mean, pick a fucking lane and if you're going to cite something and try to use it to justify your argument, do the basic due diligence of checking it out. And the reason that this exists, I mean, we can go through the rest of the piece before I make my final spiel about it. Now, the big thing about him and Zionism,
he didn't betray his politics. It's just he's running purity tests. They're not even running purity tests. I don't know what they're trying to do. Zoran Mamdani is very clearly pro-Palestinian. He's very clearly not a Zionist. I don't know what they're trying to play at. I mean, they call me a Zionist. They call my business partner, who is a Palestinian from the West Bank, a Zionist. You know, they call anyone who doesn't politically agree with Hamas a Zionist, right? It doesn't make sense that you think Palestinians are a monolith. Gazawis are a monolith, right? This idea that every single person is going to be politically aligned with Hamas is crazy. That's why there are other political parties in Gaza. Not every Canadian is a liberal, but we're not ruled, but our government is a liberal. Not every American is a Republican, but their government is Republican. So this idea, like I've seen them call Motaz Aziza, who is a journalist who came out of Gaza. He suffered through the genocide and then was able to get out to Qatar for surgery that he needed. They call him a Zionist. They call him a capo. It's crazy. These tankies, you cannot please them. And when they talk about cutting the leftists out of the left wing portion of the Democrats, they're generally talking about those guys. And I'm at a loss as to what we can tell them to like understand that not everyone is going to see everything the way they want. I believe that the Uyghurs are being mistreated. I don't know about the word genocide. I'm leaning towards the word genocide. from what I've heard from the Uyghur refugees in my area. But tankies will attack me right away. Tankies are pro-Assad after what he's done in Syria. You know what I mean? Like, they're not people you can reason with.
And this is where this kind of quote comes from, that he's a quote not anti-Zionist. An anti-Zionist, is you have to remember that like the New York Times position on this is one of the most insane and ridiculous understandings of a very basic moral human rights based approach to the world, which is that somebody who is an anti-Zionist is somebody who wants to see the violent destruction of their enemies. They probably have blood dripping out of the side of their mouth, right? And when Zoran, with his human-based politics, with his human rights-based politics, is understanding and kind of folks to say like, whoa, that's what he can't be an anti-Zionist, because an anti-Zionist, has to act in this kind of absurd and cartoonish and outlandish way that we expect him to. This is the sourcing for the anti-Zionism. Ready? Brad Lander, the city comptroller and the former mayoral candidate, was a key validator and ally in liberal Jewish communities, shrugged off the candidate's promise to arrest Netanyahu, refusing to comment on the record. What's important, Lander said.
The tech house says he's absolutely an anti-Zionist. Yeah, exactly. He absolutely is an anti-Zionist. I don't know what people are trying to play here. Like, I can't make this live stream a whole hate fest towards tankies though. So
is a different promise Mamdani made on the night of the primary when he said, quote, "I'm going to reach out and listen and try to understand." And he has more than lived up to that commitment. Lander recalled sitting with Mamdani as a group of Orthodox Jews described being called anti-Semitic slurs on the street, and he said, quote, "He was just very human, empathetic listener," he said, and in that case, he just communicated clearly that he thought that was awful. Great, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and I think it's a great thing to include in the piece.
Do they have the "we're going to show how it is" quote in this?
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
So you wanted to take us through that?
Yeah, by now we are approaching his campaign office, stuck in a crammed Manhattan service elevator with a very large security guard. With my time running out, the candidate made his response quick, signaling that this interview was now over. Quote, "Is this a campaign promise that's compatible with governing?" Per those contradictions there. And his response was, "We're going to show how it is." That is to me not like I would frankly on this sort of promise, not expect such a clear doubling down on a huge something that's going to, if he does, I mean, he's not going to arrest Netanyahu. What will happen is Netanyahu just doesn't make an attempt to appear in the city. Mm-hmm. If I had to guess, and if he goes through a term and Netanyahu doesn't visit, which is possible, that is amazing.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is that'd be a gift to the world.
It'd be nice if like Ben Gavir wasn't allowed here too. Like all these motherfuckers. I haven't been so disgusted as finding out that guy was speaking like a couple miles away from me. It's so gross.
So here we are. The mystery is solved. Has Zoran turned his back on his principles? No. So why is it that this shit is getting pumped out all the time? And again, I can't figure out what's going on with everybody. Sometimes maybe they are just trying to be malicious. Oftentimes, though, I think a lot of people are just, frankly, lazy and confused.
They're lazy, confused, and I wouldn't put it past Cuomo to have a bunch of ops in there. You know, they're trying to run disinformation campaigns. It's what Zionists do. They love to do that. So, Zoran is the real deal. Agreed. The tankies are unreasonable. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're being unreasonable. And I'm getting like the No Kings thing really opened my eyes. I'm getting more and more serious about differentiating leftists from tankies because they're not the same. Anyways,
and one of the worst things about the kind of current information system that we're in is that you can have just a very teensy tiny bit of understanding and propagate it out to the world where it's going to get a lot of engagement, because look, people do that for their own ends. And what's truly amazing about this kind of thing is that there isn't even, this is like out of context. It's like You didn't even go and do the smallest amount of investigation to even be able to pick up a position, right? Because last week it was that Zoran is not going to arrest Netanyahu. Now it's that he is, and that might be a big problem. That's what's in the pieces that you're engaging with. So, you're not even doing the basic amount of like diligence, research, engagement to be able to say these kind of things. Now, you might disagree with me, and you might not think that Zoran's position is strong enough. I would disagree. I think that there's a reason that the Zionist lobby in this country has been fighting tooth and nail to defeat this person, that they would want nothing more than to see him defeated, right? But you may disagree. But you got to go, and you got to click through. And even if you don't have the time to read the long, long piece, just do Control F and check out Israel, Gaza, these words, and you will have a deeper understanding than raging on fucking Twitter like people have been doing for the past couple of days. So this is just one example of many, but I want people to be very, very careful about this, because this is something that I think has gotten worse in the past few years, and I think it has particularly gotten worse among the left. I don't spend a lot of time on right-wing parts of the internet, so who knows there. I care about our side, and I care about people not trying to misdirect the rage and frustration and energy that people have around this issue towards some kind of dead-end politics that is against actually achieving a lot of the things that we've been setting out to do for a very, very long time.
Yep, they said it better than I could have. Please go ahead and subscribe to Left Reckoning. They are at 51. Oh, they hit the 50. They hit over 50,000 subscribers. Congratulations to Matt Lack and Dave Griscom. I hope I said that right. And let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about Palestine. So, the ceasefire, as they like to call it. Hamas ceases firing. Israel continues to fire. Bibi Netanyahu is trying. He has been. Let me see if I can find it for you guys. But he has been trying to manufacture consent for his to restart the genocide. Yeah. So let's. Oops, that's not what I'm trying to do. Let's bring this tweet up and talk about it. All right. So Hamza Yusuf posts on Twitter. Can you still call it a ceasefire when 2 IDF soldiers have been killed? Asked the Sky News host. And here's the thing, right? Like James here says, and this is true. Dropsite News has confirmed this. Noteworthy here that those soldiers were private contractors who ran over a previously placed explosive device while demolishing homes in Rafah. The Israelis blamed Hamas without evidence to cover up their demolition operation. Sky News is peddling disinformation. Netanyahu tried to use this as a reason for them to restart the genocide. They started bombing, saying that it was broken. But the U.S. government already, the people in the administration knew what had happened. What had happened was the IDF was demolishing some what was the word I'm looking for? They were demolishing homes with a bulldozer, and then ordnance that they had dropped, right? An unexploded ordnance that Israel had dropped. They ran over it and blew up. It blew up, and they tried to use that as justification to restart bombing, and they did restart bombing them. And then after 24 hours, they were told to stop. Another thing they tried to use was that Hamas apparently attacked their soldiers. But what actually happened was, it sounds like no one was actually killed, but IDF may have gotten caught between a crossfire between PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Forces, which are an ISIS-affiliated militia that are armed and supplied by Israel to fight against Hamas. They're the ones who killed the social media journalist Al Jafarawi. Anything else we want to talk about before we get into another yeah, let's talk about this. What happened in the West Bank, and then we'll get into another clip. So this is David Masterasi. He writes for The Maple. Jewish charities in Canada have sent millions of dollars to Israel over the past few decades to help make this possible. And what was made possible? These are Israeli settlers beating a Palestinian woman, an old Palestinian woman who is currently in the intensive care unit with, I believe, is it brain bleed? I believe. Brutal settler attack in Dromosaya olive fields. Many injuries, including a woman knocked unconscious with a club and beaten repeatedly. Second photo. Let's go to this. Oh yeah. The IDF lured us into an ambush. I have it all on video. We'll upload as soon as I have good service. So yeah, go to infinite_jazz. He has a Substack as well, but go to his Twitter and you'll be able to see it. Essentially, this happens all the time. Now, luckily, there was a American white journalist on the ground to record it, because if there wasn't, oh boy, would it have gotten worse. This happens all the time. This happens under IDF watch and protection, because if a Palestinian fought back against that man, if her son had come and tried to fight, first and foremost, there would have been 100 Israeli settlers on his on her son's to kill him, and they would be protected by the IDF. I know this from people who went there that I know personally. He's a doctor, and he talked about how he watched an 8-year-old and I forget the other age of the other child throw rocks at a military jeep and start running away. And guess who caught them? It wasn't the IDF. It was the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas. 2 of their soldiers grabbed them. And what did they do? They handed them over to the IDF. And the IDF beat the crap out of them. He saw kids getting shot. He saw kids take bullets to the back. In this instance, though, they got beaten severely beaten. 8 years old. 8 years old. This was in 2018. Before October 7th, 2023. And so you ask me, you call me anti-Semitic for being against that? Get out of here. Let's talk about this. Oh my God, what is up with my internet?
Israeli hostages exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. That was the headline atop the New York Times website today, and there were similar headlines throughout the Western press, of course. Now, this is a good news story. The Israelis captured on October the 7th have been through an appalling ordeal, as have the more than 1,000 Palestinians released from Israeli detention as part of Trump's ceasefire deal. But there's also something deeply misleading about that phraseology, which we've heard for 2 years now. Israeli hostages, Palestinian prisoners. It implies Israelis are innocent victims, which is why they often are seen to deserve individual profiles, like this BBC article today showing each of the faces of the 20 people released from Hamas captivity. Meanwhile, Palestinian prisoners are suspect and remain largely anonymous. Because what do we think of when we hear the word prisoners? We think of criminals, of people who have been arrested for wrongdoing and who have been subjected to fair trials, who have been convicted. A prisoner being held, unlike a hostage being taken, doesn't immediately imply an injustice. So what does this story, or this way of telling this story, miss? Well, earlier today, I spoke to Milena Ansari from Human Rights Watch, who was speaking to me from Jerusalem.
This is a really important question, because when we talk about the Palestinians that are being released from Israeli custody and detention, it's a whole variety of unlawful detention, meaning the total number of Palestinian prisoners and detainees currently is 11,000 plus. Amongst them, half of whom do not have any charges presented against them, and they've never been to trial.
So what do you call a person who has been detained, sitting in prison, No charges, not awaiting trial. They're called prisoners by Israel, but what they are hostages.
This goes to unlawful detention, a form of administrative detention, which is basically detaining a person without charge or trial, and it can be renewed indefinitely based on secret information. So neither the detainee nor their lawyers are aware of what the charges, if there are any charges against the Palestinian held in Israeli detention. So administrative detainees are held on the presumption that they might in the future commit some kind of offense. And the way the Israeli authorities use this is that they hold children under administrative detention. So Defense for Children International Palestine reported records high of children held unlawfully. When children should be held as a last resort, we see Israel detaining them without charges. This is similar to human rights defenders, political activists, and amongst many other. So the main point also, even those with a conviction or with a sentence, most of the time or all of them, the majority, have been tried and prosecuted before an Israeli military court. That lacks any fair trial guarantees. So, for the basic fair trial guarantee that is innocent until proven guilty, that doesn't exist in Israeli military courts. But the contrary, every Palestinian is guilty, whether they like it or not, or whether they committed a crime or not. To give you an understanding, the conviction rate in Israeli military courts is 99.7%. So almost always it ends up with a conviction. And the sentences are high because Israeli military orders place extremely high and exaggerated sentences. So for someone throwing a stone, they can get up to 10 years imprisonment. And if that stone hits a moving vehicle, they can get up to 20 years. So
that's so crazy. That's horrible. But they are hostages, and so many are children. Yeah, exactly. They are absolutely hostages if they are not awaiting trial and they're being held with no charges. Literally terrorists. Yep. F the IDF and their right to exist. I think humanities. Yeah, well, you know what? It's a good point, because if you're talking about when they ask you, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? This is what they're asking. Do you believe Israel has a right to exist as an apartheid state? Do you believe we have a right to exist as a state that oppresses Palestinians? And the simple answer is no. They don't have a right to exist as that type of state. But they make it extremely, they take the nuance out of it. You know what I mean? It's all about, do we have a right to exist as a Jewish state? But they mean, as we step on the rights of Palestinians, as we do oppress Palestinians, enact apartheid upon Palestinians, as we steal their land. The correct answer is no. No, you do not have the right to exist in that way. That being said, I think Francesca Albanese says this best. Nation states don't have a right to exist. Canada doesn't have a right to exist. America doesn't have a right to exist, right? Why was Russia able to sell Alaska to America? Because that's just the way it is, right? If America decides they want to buy Canada, and Canada's like, yo, we for sale, you can buy us, and they become America, the United States of America and Canada, somehow they make one state, they're allowed to do that. States don't have a right to exist. People do. People have a right to exist. Palestinians are a people. They have a right to exist. And that is being infringed upon by who? By Israel.
Basically, the system is built in order to keep Palestinians inside prison. And the last point I'll make here is, this is basically part of, the result of a separate criminal justice system. This is 100% part and parcel of Israel's apartheid and persecution that's implemented against Palestinians.
We'll talk in detail about the people released today and the people who weren't. I suppose just to get some clarity on the hostages, prisoners distinction. So I suppose to be a hostage, it's about intent, isn't it? You've captured these people to get something in exchange for returning them, some kind of ransom, essentially. Prisoners. So I suppose on the Palestinian side, what the Israelis have done is not explicit that they've taken these people for ransom, but the way that prisoner can be misleading is because prisoner suggests in the mind of the audience that these people have been proven by some fair process to have committed a crime, whereas in fact, these people are in many cases arbitrarily detained, even if it's not explicitly to achieve some kind of ransom, as is the case when it comes to Hamas with the Israeli detainees, with the Israeli captives.
That's exactly it. In a way, to simplify it a bit more, sorry for all the legal stuff that I mentioned, but that's context and reality of Palestinians in Israeli custody. To simplify it, both hostage taking and unlawful detention is a form of unlawful deprivation of liberty. They both fall under the main element that a person is held unlawfully and they shouldn't be in detention or deprived of their liberty in general. The difference is the intent. Hamas clearly said they're taking on these people, depriving them of their liberty in order to put pressure on Israel. And, context is important. Israel many times doesn't need a reason to hold Palestinians. So in a way, they don't feel the need to say we're holding them for a prison exchange to, balance the scale in a way. And this is part of the dehumanization of Palestinians. When Palestinians are always looked at, if they're in prison, for sure they did something. They're convicted of a crime. They did something major. But the reality is, and this is what the media sometimes and many times neglects to prove and clarify, is that that's not necessarily the case. These Palestinians in detention are not dangerous criminals. There are people who the Israeli occupation forces have arrested and detained in order either to silence them, either to put pressure on them. So the thing is, it's part of the dehumanization of Palestinians who are killed in Gaza. We have to say they are civilians, but when everything happens otherwhere, we just say people in general. And for example, another example, if we say like a child in detention, if they're around 17 or 18, we'd say a teenager, but they're still children. Unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of this dehumanization language go about in the past 2 years.
And let's talk, I suppose, more precisely about the people who have been released from Israeli jails over the past few hours. So as far as I understand it, there's 250 people who are classified as Palestinian prisoners, and they are people who have been charged and found guilty of a crime, although, as you say, this is in military courts, there isn't really any due process. And the other group of people is 1,700 detainees from Gaza, and they were essentially picked up, weren't they, sort of during the war, somewhat arbitrarily, including 15 minors. So, yeah, I mean, if you could give us a few more details about those two groups of people, and if there are any sort of important differences between them.
Yeah, I'll start off with the around 1,700 plus Palestinians who were arrested and rounded up from Gaza by Israeli ground forces the past 2 years. And for this, let me be extremely clear, for these 1,700 plus, all of them are held arbitrary and were detained arbitrary, because none of these 1,700 were ever presented with a list of charges or were ever put before a judge or a military trial. They were held under something that the Israeli authorities call the unlawful combatants law. And it's a similar method of administrative detention, detaining someone under the presumption that they may in the future do something. All these 1,700 should not have been in Israeli detention. They should not have been arrested. We've been, for Human Rights Watch, we documented, for example, the arrest and detention of healthcare workers from Gaza who were rounded up, for example, during their medical evacuation from the north to the south. And these medical evacuations were coordinated by the Israeli forces on the ground. And yet paramedics, doctors, nurses, when they were at a checkpoint, they were detained by Israeli forces and after months or weeks or days released. Again, no charges, no trial. The only reason these individuals were detained, for example, is to either get information from them. Most of the time, they did not have any information about anything of the hostilities because they're healthcare workers. But they also were detained as a form of pressure, adding more numbers to how many Palestinians are in detention. So from those who were sent back to Gaza or released to Gaza, it included 2 women. So 2 women who were also detained from Gaza and illegally moved and transferred within Israel, which is occupying power. And it included a child as well. So this just gives you a sense of who they are. And again, emphasis, they should not have been in detention to begin with. The other bunch or the other group of released Palestinians were, as you mentioned, yes, those who had high sentences, those who had convictions against them while they were prosecuted in a military court. But I'll give you an example of a few, not to name names, but some of the high sentences are like 2 decades, 20 years plus. And these were individuals who were arrested and detained during the Second Intifada in 2000. So these were people or individuals who were either, taking part in protests or any operations during the Second Intifada. And this was during, when the population was rising against occupation. So this all goes into, the system of oppression and domination, regardless of how a Palestinian wants to fight for a liberated Palestine. There's always, these military courts and military orders that make it almost impossible for anyone to be seen as the arbitrary detention that they have. An example of this, I'll be more clear. Mohammed al-Halabi, for example, he was released in the previous prison exchange deal, and he is the director of New Vision, an organization that was based in Gaza. And the charge against him was, funding money to Hamas, and there were no direct, connections or direct proof to that. So his detention was in order to silence New Vision's work. And then later he was released during a prisoner exchange. These are just some of the groups that were released. And, from the ones, the 250 with high sentences, 154 will be exiled, and they will be released to Gaza, and from Gaza to Egypt. And then we don't even know. I've been trying to figure out what exiled and deported means. And till now, we don't know. And this is just, a small reporting of who are the groups. But what I would add is I was a bit heartbroken or maybe disappointed that none of these lists included, for example, the 300 plus children who are unlawfully held in Israeli detention, which was honestly a bit of a slap to the face. But I would focus on the broader around 2,000 Palestinians who were released. And none of these groups included specifically women. There were 2 women from Gaza released, but we still have 50 Palestinian women and a girl held in Israeli detention without an understanding about the conditions. We know about the conditions, but without knowing when they will ever be released.
Yeah, let's talk about conditions, because I suppose another distinction that people might sort of imagine when they think of hostages and they think of prisoners, are hostages are held, without any due process. Of course, hostages are held without any due process, but you imagine it being very different, being taken hostage to being taken prisoner. Can you talk about what it's like to be a Palestinian prisoner who's either been, as you say, convicted in a trial without much due process, or arbitrarily detained? What is it like to be in an Israeli prison? Because, of course, there's some good news today, which is people have been released, but the bad news is that many more people remain languishing in those jails. So what are the conditions like?
Yeah, well, I fully, first of all, acknowledge and understand as someone who has never been inside Israeli detention and prison, I cannot fully send or reflect an accurate picture of what has been happening. And with the Israeli authorities banning and denying the international community for the Red Cross to do their mandated prison monitoring of conditions, we do have some kind of vagueness about the reality. But having had spoken to several Palestinians who were released, including healthcare workers from Gaza and Gaza workers who were detained from October 7, 2023, and reading reports from the UN Commission of Inquiry, for example, the OHCHR as well, Israeli and Palestinian human rights organizations, we do understand that the conditions have been brutal and abusive all throughout detention. What I mean by this is, for Human Rights Watch, we have a report from 1994 that talks about the systematic ill treatment of Palestinians in interrogation. But what we are slowly realizing is that now torture is throughout the whole arrest process, from the minute a person is taken and detained and arrested up until they're transferred to a detention facility and later a prison. And through every day and hour inside this prison facility, there's torture, there's abuse, and there's ill treatment. What we mean by this, witnesses we spoke to and from various reports, there's prolonged blindfolding and prolonged cuffing by the hands and the feet. So throughout detention, detainees have been blindfolded and cuffed by their hands. Why I emphasize this prolonged cuffing by the hands and knees is because Physicians for Human Rights Israel reported that dozens of Palestinians had their limbs amputated, including arms and legs, from the prolonged cuffing. You can imagine the cutting of proper blood circulation. What would it do with infections? And of course, there's medical neglect. The healthcare workers I spoke to were extremely helpful in understanding, as a healthcare worker, how did they see the health conditions of other detainees and prisoners. And they all reported that there's medical neglect. People with diabetes, with cancer, with chronic illnesses are neglected. There's no proper monitoring to their conditions. There's no proper providing them with medical treatment, even when the injuries that are the detainees subjected to from torture and ill treatment, Israeli authorities do not provide any treatment to those. But we're also talking about deprivation of food. If you've noticed the videos of the released prisoners and detainees, the released Palestinians today, they're all, skeleton body with faces that are faded of life in a way. And every detainee who was released that I spoke to said they lost from 10 to 20 kilograms during their detention because they're deprived of proper food and clean water. And this is something, unfortunately, that we saw Israel weaponize against Palestinians in Gaza and using starvation as a weapon of war. But there's also sleep deprivation. There's
sorry, I needed to pause it because I wanted to add some commentary. One thing that Zionists love to come back with is when you post a picture of someone who's lost a lot of weight, they'll counter. For some reason, they think this is a good counter, but they'll counter with, "Well, he has another sickness." He had, even we saw it with the starvation of children in Gaza. The Free Press, that loser Olivia Reingold, whatever the hell her name is, she tried to say that, well, yeah, they're starving, but they actually had cerebral palsy as well. That's why they look like this. So they have a underlying sickness, and you're starving them on top of that. Exactly the same thing with these prisoners. Well, this guy had cancer. Actually, he has stage 4, liver failure. Did he get treatment? Did you allow him to get treatment? No. Well, then, how is that a good counter? Also, can you explain why this guy's got cuts all over him? Why did this boy? I remember that boy who was released in the first hostage exchange. He was released with 2 broken arms. They broke the arms of a child, both of them, while he was languishing in an Israeli jail on no charge and not awaiting trial. And you're going to tell me that those are not the terrorists?
Physical beatings on private areas, on sensitive parts, being forced to kneel on the ground 24/7, deliberate humiliation, blackmailing, electrocution even, threats of death, threats of rapes, but also repeated strip searches that are completely humiliating, and the forced nudity of both men and women, and beatings to both men and women while being naked, including on the genitals. Being forced to undergo humiliating strip searches is something almost every person I spoke to reported on. And throughout their whole detention, there was just, verbal abuse, cursing God, cursing religion, cursing family members, and the continuous also isolation. Since October 2023, the Palestinians inside Israeli custody, they've been completely stripped of all their belongings. No water kettle to heat water, no toothbrushes even, no products to clean the rooms they're in, 1 pair of underwear and 1 pair of clothes on them, nothing else, not even not even a radio or a TV to understand what's happening from the outside world. So these 1,700 plus Palestinians who were released from Gaza, they have no idea whether their family members are alive or they've been killed. We're seeing videos that are completely harrowing. A mother just so happy to see her loved one from Gaza being released, because for months during their detention they had no idea whether they're alive or killed.
Thank you for sorry, not thank you for watching. We watched that together. If you can, please go ahead and give a like and subscribe to Novara Media. They do extremely good work across the pond in the UK. And then let's see what Dropsite News has to say. Censorship and military support, how big tech... Nah, I don't want to. Yeah, let's talk about this. UK government funnels £1 million of public money to pro-Israel group amid campus crackdown. Let me just make this a little bit bigger because your boy is blind in his left eye, so you can't see very well. The British government is allocating a £100 million package of public funds to a vehemently Zionist and pro-Israel organization, the Union of Jewish Students, UJS, under the guise of combating anti-Semitism. Now, the thing here, all right, I want to be very clear, right? Just because it's called the Union of Jewish Students, criticizing them doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. If I'm criticizing them because it is a group of Jewish people, then it's anti-Semitic. I am criticizing the fact that they are Zionist and pro-Israel, which is not anti-Semitic. Zionism, right? Let us be clear here. Zionism is a political, settler, colonial, right-wing ideology. And it is fair game to criticize. Anyways, I'm not subscribing. The decision announced as students across the UK protested Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza is an obvious political effort to silence criticism of Israel and conflate it with hatred of Jewish people. The UJS, which positions itself as the voice of Jewish students, is deeply enmeshed with the Zionist establishment. It is linked to the World Zionist Organization, a key driver of illegal, violent settlements that steal Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Right? Remember that video we saw earlier, or the pictures we saw earlier of that lady being, that old woman being beat into the ICU essentially by Israeli settlers? This group supports that. Under this scheme, the UJS will train university staff to identify harassment, a program critics warn will be used to falsely label legitimate support for Palestinian rights and condemnation of Israeli war crimes as anti-Semitic. This comes alongside authoritarian warning from the Department for Education that universities must ban disruptive protests, a clear reference to the growing Palestinian solidarity movement. The government's crackdown relies on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has been widely condemned as a tool for censorship designed to shield the Israeli state from accountability. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism conflates the criticism of Israel as a Jewish state as anti-Semitism, right? That's not fair because we are allowed to criticize Israel and the genocide they are committing. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer has disgracefully branded the student-led protests as un-British, attacking democratic dissent while whitewashing Israeli atrocities. The UJS itself is a fervent advocate for the Zionist state. Its then president was filmed boasting that its alumni serve in senior roles in the Israeli government, military, and intelligence apparatus. The organization explicitly aims to strengthen what it calls a personal relationship with Israel among students, actively promoting an ideology of settler colonialism. This funding represents a blatant use of public money to empower a group aligned with a state accused of genocide, all while the government engages in a sweeping crackdown on the right to protest. It is dangerous. It is a dangerous escalation that abandons genuine safety for Jewish students in favor of enforcing a pro-Israel orthodoxy and suppressing growing public outrage over the massacre in Gaza. essentially they're going to give £1 million to a group that runs cover for a genocidal regime and is going to pressure universities to crack down on legitimate protest of genocide. Like, talk about an uphill battle for Palestinians. They have to fight in every aspect of to humanize themselves and to convince people that they have a right to exist. Right? Israel keeps banging on about their right to exist. Anyways, yeah, so if you like that article, it was a quick article. It was more of an update. Subscribe to the tungstenwire.com. That is our website. It's a Substack, actually. And my friend Ali Imran does great work. One day, maybe he'll be on the stream. Alrighty. All right, so let's do the Supreme Court. Post to hand GOP near total control from the Humanist Report, and then we'll watch some Canadian news, and then we'll end the stream. Why does it take so long? Anyways.
I know a lot of people are hoping that we'll have an opportunity to restore democracy at some point, perhaps once Trump is out of office, but unfortunately, it's looking more and more like competitive authoritarianism is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future, because there's so many things working against democracy right now. Right-wing oligarchs now own the most prominent media and social media companies in the country. They've also started to take control of voting machines. Just last week, Dominion Voting Systems was purchased by a Republican. And they're also...
So, I mean, if it was just a Republican, like who votes Republican, then it is what it is. I mean, they are companies, but a Republican election official, that's crazy. That's crazy. I don't understand how this is a superpower when in the West, when they run like a Middle Eastern dictatorship.
Gearing up to crack down even harder on their opposition. Here's what Scott Bessent and AG Pam Bondi said recently.
Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. And that's one of the things about Antifa. You've heard President Trump say multiple times, they are organized, they are a criminal organization, and they're very organized. You're seeing people out there with thousands of signs that all match, pre-bought, pre-put together. They're organized and someone is funding it. We're going to get to the funding of Antifa. We're going to get to the root of Antifa, and we are going to find and charge all of those people who are causing this chaos.
So let me get this right. LOL, Antifa isn't an actual organization. Yeah, exactly. It means anti-fascist. I don't know. And if you're against anti-fascism, does that mean you're pro-fascist? I guess so, because the Cheeto-looking loser in power is quite the fascist. Also, what's she talking about? Oh, they're clearly organized. It's not an organization, but even if they are, you can organize on Twitter. You can see a sign that you like and make it yourself on Twitter. Like, what are you talking about? They're so stupid.
9/11, Treasury became the driving force behind tracking down the networks of terrorist organizations, how they were financed. How could this have happened on U.S. soil with these international terrorist organizations? Where did the money come from? Who were the ultimate funders? And that was on the international side. And Andrew, I will tell you that Charlie's death is like a domestic 9/11. When you see these...
A podcaster's death is like 9/11? America, what are you doing? What are you doing?
These groups where all...
Oh, it's the Charlie Kirk show. That's why he said that. I was going to say, like, what?
The signs match. They have hundreds of the same umbrellas that they're using. You know, after they cause the mayhem, they have the same lasers that they're using to blind our police force. How are they constructed, because this takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of organization, and we are going to do that. We have started to compile lists, put together networks, just as after 9/11 and Osama bin Laden, the ultimate culprit, was captured. We are operationalizing this here at Treasury, and we are going to track down who is responsible for this.
The reason why they're comparing anti-fascist protesters to the cartel and broadcasting their intent to go after them in the same way that they went after terrorist networks in the aftermath of 9/11 is because they want you to know to expect violence if you protest this regime. It's a threat. Organizing protests is not a crime. Having similar signs isn't a crime. It'd be like if Democrats went after the designer of the mass deportation signs that we saw last year at the RNC. My friend Andrea is designing signs for the No Kings protest that people can print themselves, and she's not getting paid for that. She's not being funded by George Soros. She's a graphic designer doing it out of the goodness of her heart because she cares about this country. This is, in essence, like the First Amendment and what it's supposed to protect, but they don't want us to have the right to criticize them, so they're going to straight up wage war on us, on American citizens. And what they're doing is going to foster a generation of Americans who are conditioned to stay quiet in order to avoid the wrath of the regime. I mean, these changes are going to have profound, long-term, damaging effects on this country, and they're not going to be easy to undo once Trump is out of power. And that's assuming that he's even planning to leave in the first place, because as Newsweek reports, Trump 2028 talks are ramping up among Republicans, with politicians like Randy Fine calling for the repeal of the 22nd Amendment, and operatives like Steve Bannon are basically admitting that they're going to try to find some way for Trump to essentially bypass the 22nd Amendment so he can run for a third term. But in addition to all of this, we now have to worry about another Supreme Court case that would be devastating. Louisiana v. Calais, and you might have already heard tidbits about this case because it centers around the Voting Rights Act, but I don't think people really grasp how devastating it would be if the Supreme Court rules in the way that they look like they're about to rule based on oral arguments that we just heard. To put it into perspective for you all, it wouldn't just pave the way for a return to Jim Crow, literally. It would lock in one-party rule for Republicans for at least a generation. And this is according to a report produced by Fair Fight Action and Black Voters Matter. Like, we are talking about political consequences that are so devastating, they would outlive the Trump regime. And that right there is what I want to focus on in today's video. So what's in contention in particular is Section 2 specifically of the Voting Rights Act, which makes it illegal to gerrymander districts in a racially discriminatory way. This provision has stopped Republican-controlled states from eliminating representation for Black Americans in southern states, and this is what the civil rights movement fought for. But now this part of the VRA, which again bans racist gerrymandering, might actually be struck down because, and this is not a joke, conservatives are arguing that it's racist against white people. In other words, not being able to discriminate against Black people is tantamount to racism against white people. Now, I'll admit that's an oversimplification of their legal argument, but that's what it comes down to, right? They want to be able to discriminate against Black people and gerrymander their representation away, dilute their voting power, and if they can't do that, they think that that's unfair to them. But let me give you some additional context here so you understand what they're talking about here. So as Stephen Prager of Common Dreams writes, the origins of the case itself are highly unusual. It began typically enough with a conservative Fifth Circuit court affirming a lower court's ruling that the congressional maps drawn by Louisiana's GOP in 2022 constituted an illegal racial gerrymander. Despite Black residents making up roughly a third of Louisiana's population, many of them were crammed into a single district, while the other 5 in the state remained majority white. After the court ruling, Republican Governor Jeff Landry convened an emergency legislative session to draw new maps that complied with the court's order and granted another majority Black district. But shortly after the map was finalized, it was challenged by a group of white voters who alleged that by drawing new maps that gave Black voters fairer representation, Louisiana's legislature was effectively enacting an illegal racial gerrymander against voters who are not Black. And this is so diabolical because they're basically using Section 2 against itself to destroy Section 2. Now, it's bizarre that the court even decided to take up this case, seeing as how they just rejected this same argument back in 2022 in Allen v. Milligan, and Section 2 of the VRA was upheld. So it's reasonable to assume, based on that case, that this case would go the same way, right? The problem is that things are fundamentally different this time. And the thing that's different is Brett Kavanaugh. So in 2022, he voted to uphold Section 2, but released a concurring opinion where he agreed with something that Clarence Thomas said in his dissenting opinion. And Clarence Thomas basically argued that these bans against discrimination, they can't go on indefinitely. They have to expire at some point. And even though Kavanaugh at the time thought that it was necessary to uphold Section 2, he still telegraphed his agreement with Thomas that it should be taken away at some point. And it seems like the time to take away Section 2 has now come, just 3 years later for Kavanaugh. Politico reports Justice Brett Kavanaugh, whose vote will likely be pivotal in the case, repeatedly suggested that race-based remedies under the Voting Rights Act should be permitted only for a limited period of time. They should have an endpoint, Kavanaugh said during the oral arguments, which stretched for about 2.5 hours. Now, compared to the other conservative justices who Politico described as outright hostile towards Section 2, which is crazy, Kavanaugh isn't necessarily hostile towards it. He just stupidly believes that racism in politics, I guess, has been solved, even though just a couple of years ago, he agreed that Section 2 was necessary to stop Republicans from racially discriminating against black people in their states. But I mean, the reason why he's so important and all the attention is focused on him is because if he flips, it becomes 5-4 in the other direction, which means they then have the majority to gut the Voting Rights Act, basically give it its final death blow, which means that the Supreme Court, if they did this, would effectively legalize electoral racial discrimination once again. Now, this to me is horrifying to think about, and you can only, catastrophize so much, but I want to go to an analysis by Max Pflugrath of Slate, where he lays out what this is going to mean in practice. He writes, combined with Donald Trump and Republicans' ongoing gerrymandering power grab, gutting Section 2 could help secure an additional 27 safe GOP U.S. seats, at least 19 directly tied to the loss of Section 2. According to a new analysis from Fair Fight Action and Black Voters Matter Fund, it's enough to cement one-party control of the House for at least a generation. The result would essentially be a return to the pre-1965 Jim Crow playbook masked in pseudo-constitutional language. If Section 2 falls, we could see an existential shift in power, a system in which representation reflects not the will of the people, but the will of those in power. Congress would become insulated from accountability, its makeup preserved by maps drawn to protect incumbents. Remember, Trump won the 2024 election by just 2.2 million votes out of more than 155 million cast. This is how democracies erode, not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, deliberately, and often quietly by design. The VRA was passed to stop those in power from deciding who gets to have a voice and who doesn't. If the court removes that protection, it will hand the Trump regime and its allies a powerful tool to permanently weaken fair representation, tighten their grip on power, and drag the country further into authoritarian rule. Without Section 2, Americans would be left with a hollow shell of democracy, elections that appear free but are rigged to keep power in the same hands. Protecting the independence of our elections is the only way to halt that slide away from freedom. Now, additionally, with regard to the specific impact this will have on black and brown people, Fair Fight Action and Black Voters Matter estimate in their report that 30% of Congressional Black Caucus members and 11% of Congressional Hispanic Caucus members are going to lose their seats because of this. So little by little, our new authoritarian status quo is really starting to take shape. And I don't like what that looks like. It looks like a competitive authoritarian regime where elections are merely a way for our Republican rulers to do performative democracy, but elections just will by no means facilitate meaningful changes in power, which is...
What did I say at the beginning of the stream? The more and more I look at and watch about America, the more and more I'm seeing the Middle East and the oppression that exists there, no matter what country you talk about. Even Southeast Asia, you talk about Pakistan, the way things are going there, like it's absolutely incredible. Anyways, let's keep watching.
Antithetical to democracy. I mean, elections happen in every single regime, even totalitarian ones. They just are there for a show. And that's what American democracies are slowly but surely turning into. Black Americans will be legal second-class citizens once again with no representation. Ideological opponents will be intimidated and punished for challenging the regime. And information itself will be suppressed and controlled by the ruling party's oligarchs. This is what we have in store. But I will say that as bleak as it looks, there are things that can be done to push back against this blatant power grab. Max Pflugrath, for example, recommends that every single Democratic state aggressively gerrymander as many seats away from Republicans as they possibly can. To counter what they're doing, you have to fight fire with fire. But unfortunately, I don't think Democrats are up for the task. I just don't think they're willing to do that, aside from Gavin Newsom, as flat as he may be. But I mean, if you have a seat that you can gerrymander away from a Republican, you have to do that now. Most Democratic-controlled states aren't doing that. But I mean, if the Supreme Court really does do what it looks like they're going to do and turns America into a one-party state, we're going to have to get creative, right? We may need to infiltrate the Republican Party and have leftists and progressives run as Republicans, right? They may start to tighten eligibility criteria.
Yeah, we need to run a reverse Fetterman. Fetterman ran as a progressive, turned out he was the most, at best, neoliberal, at worst, Republican authoritarian piece of garbage you've ever seen, that Count Olaf looking a loser that he is. I mean, we should have seen the writing on the wall before he was elected when he chased a black man with a rifle. But alas, here we are. Mr. Biggest genocide supporting piece of garbage you've ever seen. But I mean, he had a stroke. Maybe that's what broke his brain. Anyways.
As a result of that, but I mean, you got to start like thinking outside of the box, because it's clear that democracy isn't just going to be restored automatically by us waiting out the clock and hoping and praying that Trump leaves office in 2028. There has to be a robust movement driven by working class people of all colors and stripes to take power back from the fascists, because you can't just assume that things are going to go back to normal at some point on their own. Not that, normal was good to begin with. And I think that normal is what facilitated the rise of authoritarianism. But I mean, things aren't going to change for the better automatically. I think that we have to come to terms with the fact that that ship has sailed and democracy is already dead. But having said that, as tight as their grip on power may be, and as powerful as their propaganda is, authoritarianism doesn't have to be permanent. Most people around the world, they live in some kind of authoritarian regime. It's not just us. And even the most repressive dictatorships cannot withstand pressure from mass mobilization. Sure, they might try to suppress it, but it doesn't take much to spark an entire mass movement. So whether or not our bout with authoritarianism will be permanent or just a phase is going to hinge on whether or not we choose to give up. And it's easy to just like see this news and want to check out. But you have to understand that things have always been very difficult in America. I'd argue that indigenous people and women, as well as civil rights leaders from the 60s and LGBTQ plus leaders, were up against far worse than what we're up against now, as bad as things are, but they never gave up. And I feel like if they didn't give up and they fought for our future, we can't give up. And we have to fight for the future, right? The next generation. You got to basically channel your frustration into something productive rather than checking out, because change is only going to become impossible once we all stop trying. And I know that sounds corny, believe me, but it's true. You cannot give up. You have to do something to make a difference. That means organizing, meeting with people locally, canvassing, getting involved politically. Checking out is exactly what they want. But putting that aside, it's bleak right now. And it may get even worse. So it looks like the Supreme Court is going to do the unthinkable. And if they do, we're going to be in very, very bad shape, to put it mildly.
Do yourself a favor.
Do yourself a favor and subscribe to the Humanist Report. Anyways, I said we were going to watch a video about Canadian politics, but I'm tired. Had a really long day at work. Not long day, but you know how it is. So I'm going to call it here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for chatting with me today. I appreciate all the chats. I appreciate the likes, the subscribers. If you want more, please subscribe. If you want to read more, please subscribe to thetungstenwire.com. It's free to do, and it will never cost you a penny. Even if we ever turn on monetization, all of our content on Substack will be free. That being said, thank you so much for watching, and peace be upon you.